Hello there, Qckslvrslash here, and today we have a video going back to the original World of Warships machine gun, the Tier 3 St. Louis, courtesy of Admiral Goodfella. And anyone who's gone up the American line has sailed through the St. Louis, and this ship was a blast to play back in the day. And every once in a while, when there's a mission on that the St. Louis would just do an amazing job at, like light a bunch of fires, I typically go jump in her. But sadly, that hasn't been all that often of late because more and more of these missions have, tier 5 to 9 limitations. And I think it's to prevent people from just going and milking torpedoes and fires and stuff down at the low tiers. And that makes sense, but it means I haven't sailed the St. Louis as much as I would have in the past. Fortunately, other people are, and they're having great games in them too. And one of the things that made this ship so strong was not just the guns, but its armor. With those coal bunkers, the way they were originally done, you know, shells just didn't get into you. And I find a couple times I've gone back, the mild changes that have occurred to ships over time have affected that, but it's still a great little ship and really needs no introduction. Enemy V-25 out on the other side of that island, and, well, right now it's only 4 guns on target. And I guess that is one of the downsides to this ship, is there's certain angles that you really just can't get too much gunpowder going, but doesn't seem to matter, landing almost 1400 damage there, temporarily knocking out the engine. Next volley knocks out some torpedo tubes. One of the things the St. Louis is great at is that death spiral, just continuously turning in a circle and just rotating through whatever guns happen to be on target. And I'd almost say it's kind of a specialty of low tier Americans, because you think the Phoenix and the Omaha are sort of the same way in that they've got a lot of these single barreled turrets, but it's no longer unique to them. You've got some of the low tier Germans that do it, and so on and so forth. And obviously, the most dangerous thing to a St. Louis is another St. Louis, because then it comes down how do you drive and a bit of luck, and that was some great luck. First volley, 2 fires, and you can see the enemy St. Louis is letting them burn. And I find that a little curious. They are turning out, they're getting out of dodge, but they're letting a lot of health go. And it's not like a battleship where you kind of go, okay, one fire, you just let it be because you can repair through it. In cruisers, especially this tier, you're not really repairing through lots of fire damage, so getting those fires out can be important. You obviously do have to weigh and balance the consequence of, what if I put it out only to get lit on fire again? But I think Admiral Goodfella here is going to have something else to pay attention to. As you can see from the map, not sure whether they noticed or not, there is a Nassau just to their northwest that really could be punishing him. And more importantly, he could be punishing that Nassau. Battleships are the #1 thing to take down with the St. Louis. Like, they're great with cruisers and destroyers, but at this tier, pretty much everything's great at killing each other. But the battleships really suffered from this onslaught of HE. And it makes playing the low tier battleships infinitely frustrating, because their accuracy is miserable. You'll get like 4 or 5 kilometers from something and go to do a full broadside, and 1 shell will hit on a properly aimed thing just because of the scatter. And I think that gives cruisers a definite advantage at this tier. And, well, look at that enemy St. Louis. Finally burns down and is a goner. Admiral Goodfellow picking up their first kill, 25,000 damage, and has secured this cap, but he's got a whole team behind him. And once again, that's kind of how things tend to go in ships. You're either on the side where there's not a lot of you, or there's a lot of you. And I'd say that Umikaze is in trouble, but it's a Tachibana. Anything should be able to kill a Tachibana. So I think that Umikaze should be able to get out of there, though there are a lot of other enemy ships there. And, well, the Umikaze just lost a friendly. But this Nassau has made a massive miscalculation. It turned out to come around the island, and it's coming around completely separated. Like, it should have turned up and sailed to that AFK North or South Carolina. That would have been the smart move. Get at least something potentially friendly near you. Instead, turning and charging a pair of destroyers and a St. Louis. That's a recipe for failure, because you know you're going to get lit on fire at some point. You're probably going to eventually put those fires out, and you know there's going to be tons of torpedoes in the water at you from a pair of low-tier destroyers. The only thing they've really got going for them is amazing torpedo reload at those low tiers. And, well, the Nassau just ate a pair and is down to 10,000 hit points. As it sails into the border, I was like, how the heck is it turning that sharp? And then I looked at the map. So right here, obviously, Admiral is praying for that fire. Start getting that tick damage and just slowly peppering the one shell after the next. And one of the nice things about kind of volley fire like this, and really makes the St. Louis a good learning tool low on, is you learn how to steer your shots in. The Atlanta's another good example of this. Sure, they've got high arc, but because there's always a stream of shells, you can kind of learn to steer and figure out where you need to lead different targets at different angles of approach. And, well, South Carolina is no longer AFK, but now the Nassau's down, so the South Carolina's all alone with a Koenig Elbert Nassau and like a V-25 in close proximity. And I'm not sure what good Admiral's doing. Oh, he was typing there. I'm like, why hasn't he started turning to get over to the South Carolina? It's free damage. And, well, damage can be really hard to come by at these low tiers because games tend to really snowball and just get out of control really quickly. One team tends to just start getting damage in, and they just run train through the enemy team, not stopping, just kill after kill after kill, and you're lucky if you can, get some shots in, particularly if you end up out on the side. And that's probably one of the disadvantages to the St. Louis. It's not that fast. Now, things at this tier are not particularly speedy, but the kind of 23 knots you can normally manage to do does feel really slow, and like, just look at it. Just watching this ship try to sail somewhere, it's kind of painful. Especially when you consider like ships like the Charles Martel, which with the speed boost active are doing over 40 knots. Double this speed nearly. Fortunately, some targets are coming back into range, but Admiral Goodfellow is basically going to have to just keep sailing straight, which means not a lot of guns on target. Now, I would angle the like 15-20 degrees to starboard just to get, those 2 or 3 other guns firing. But there's going to be other targets appearing soon enough. And there's a bit of the turn. There we go. And things are surprisingly, I was about to say even. The enemy team is winning. They were looking even for a bit, but Goodfellow's team lost another ship, and that really starts to put them a little further behind. Until they lost that, they had a ship advantage, but were down on points, and you can come back from that. But all those destroyers are so busy chasing that enemy St. Louis. Those DDs should all be right down here in these islands, just swarming B with torpedoes. Instead, they went for the singular cruiser up alone, and this Storchevoy G101 V25, they're out of really effective gun range from the bulk of the enemy fleet, and that's where you want to be. That said, they are getting torpedoes into the St. Louis. They're gonna help finish them off, and that'll be one less ship to have to deal with, and it'll bring the scores a little closer. Goodfella's shell is the one that finishes it off, picking up his second kill up to just shy of 43,000 damage. And, you know, I kind of touched on this a couple times, and it's because I hate to see people hating on games going, oh, only this much damage? Like, a good rule of thumb for, you know, kind of an appropriate amount of damage to do at any tier is take your tier, multiply it by 10. Or, not 10, but 10,000. So tier 3, if you're doing 30,000 damage in a game, you're having a good game. If you're at tier 4, 40,000. Tier 5, 50. And so on and so forth, up to tier 10, whereas if you can get 100,000 damage in a tier 10 game, you've done good. Like, it's not the mark of an astounding game, but it's a great start. And, you know, if you apply that rule here, he's closing in on kind of double that mark already. Enemy Chester, the next punching bag for just that volley of shells. And one of the fun things with the St. Louis is just to kind of watch all the guns just fire in a big ripple. Just kind of that stream of shells. The Atlanta, you know, another American ship that I love because it's just fun to play, and it's challenging because with the Atlanta you have to get in close to be able to do that damage. Now you're hopeful that friends are there to kind of smoke you and stuff, but otherwise it's some, you know, kind of tricky WASD hacks that keep you safe most of the time as your guns just go crazy. And things are pretty much dead even here. The destroyers on Goodfella's team have gone up, they've gotten Charlie. That's a wise move. They're down on points, you need to get the caps. The enemy team looks to be eagerly pushing towards Alpha to kind of counter that, and uh-oh. Goodfella turned hard over, and I don't think he knew there was an island there. With that Chester, Weymouth, and Wicks all in range, this is not a good thing to have done, but he can still keep his guns going. Hopefully take out that enemy Wicks. At very minimum, is landing some good shells, takes out his engines there, picks up Confederate, and the Wicks slams the brakes on and starts turning, using those keyboard commands to actually avoid damage. He was sailing in straight line for such a long time. And I think people just get kind of locked into a mentality. And you can see Goodfella here. He's the focus of a lot of stuff. He's shooting this Weymouth. I would probably switch targets and shoot the Chester. The Weymouth is sailing behind land, not actively being hit, but the Chester gets killed by his teammate, dealing with the problem for Goodfella, and he's getting moving, finally clear that island right as the Kohlberg comes around the corner. And Kohlberg is a ship I hate, but it's kind of another example of, you know, these earlier design ships with just single turret guns everywhere. It was kind of prior to real turrets where you had multiple barrels in the same gun mount. And, well, what is happening to that Kohlberg is the reason I hate it. And the St. Louis just has the hit points. And, you know, they're both tier 3 ships. He finishes off the Wicks, and, you know, the Kohlberg comes into this map half the hit points, doesn't have the same kind of gun power. The Kohlberg is quick, but doesn't matter. Goodfella finishes them both off, picks up the double strike, is up to 64,000 damage, is working on the Weymouth. I would probably slam the brakes on here, but friendly V25 might get the kill. Misses in that close, missing the shot. And the Weymouth takes the V25 out. Now Goodfella switches over, he's got this G101 behind him, harassing him with the guns, so, you know, he's bringing his own around. You want to play the gun game? We can play that game. And you also see he's just weaving back and forth. And it's enough that that G101 just can't seem to hit him. And that's where the guns in every location really come in handy. You know, you're always going to have at least one barrel pointing in the right direction to do some damage. And I think the G101 kind of went, maybe I shouldn't try to run down a St. Louis. But he's the only ship left now. And the enemy teams got a decent lead. The Nassau is about to get into Bravo. I have no clue what the Qckslvrslash is doing. It's off at the cap wall. Maybe he thought the game was over and just left. But either way, this is where the speed sucks. If you're in a quicker ship, you can put pressure on that G101. You can get in there and make a difference, make a run on the cap. But the reality is, 4 minutes left. They're down just shy of 200 points. It's not really enough time to close the gap, not with how slow a St. Louis and Nassau are. You really need the DD, who's driven off the edge of the world, to be in this game. That's your speed. That's your capture points at the end of games. Because, well, they're taking B. A's a long ways away. Probably about 10 kilometers right now. Fortunately, well, the HUD may say 23 knots. If you do the actual math in this game, you're doing like 230 knots. It's one of the kind of funny things about warships that always gets to me is they had to mess with the scale a lot to make naval battles interesting, because if you look at your post-battle, the distance traveled, it's always this really big number that in real life, at the speeds ships really go, like take you an hour and a half, 2 hours at top speed to do, you're doing in 15 minutes. So when you start to do that math, you realize, okay, these ships are cruising around fast. And as a sailor myself and former Navy officer, that was one of my biggest pet peeves early on in beta. I noticed it and went, hey, you guys know, like, you can't do 20 nautical miles in 20 minutes. Like, you'd have to be doing 60 knots, and none of the ships in the game do that. And, well, never got an answer to that. But talking to a couple people, it just seems they've had to do it to make the game interesting, because as much as people would love, you know, kind of something more realistic and lifelike, you'd hate it, because you'd spend 4 or 5 hours sailing in a straight line just trying to get somewhere, like, say, across this map, and then you'd die because something got you spotted, fired over the horizon, and nuked you. So interestingly, Goodfella is still spotted here. And, I mean, that tells you one thing, that G101 is somewhere close. You know, the Qckslvrslash still cruising down the edge of the map, and there's the Peds. And the one thing I love about late torpedoes in a game, especially a game this close, it tells you where the destroyer is. You know the kind of range, so you know, okay, the torpedoes originated from about where my cursor is. And, I mean, Goodfella's firing a little too close in, and he's brought himself in to that ridiculous view where you're too close. I would, sorry about the clicking there, I would honestly just start shooting the far side of the cap. Just start dropping shells there, because one of the tricks, I mean, with destroyers is you can scare them into shooting back. Not everyone looks and goes, oh, I'm detected. And especially before, that was a skill that everyone had. You could just shoot in the direction of a destroyer. They'd go, oh crap, they've got me detected, and start shooting back, revealing their location. And look how close this came down to, 991 to 919. And the G101 just made the critical error. 30 seconds is not enough to close that points gap. But with the cap being challenged, he decided, I need to be the hero. He comes charging in, guns blazing, and 10 seconds left. The enemy team still has the lead. The G101 just has to disappear. 5, 4, 3, 2, and the kill. And unfortunately, there is no post-battle
results for this game, but it just seems some people have all the luck. Admiral Goodfellow's team had lost that game. The G101 just had to sail away, and whether he just couldn't do the math in his head, didn't know any better, thought he had to turn in and engage to try to save the day, and wound up throwing it away with 2 seconds left. Goodfellow managed to finish him off, picked up the Kraken, and finished with 69,595 damage, I believe, which is a great amount of damage at this tier. Once again, my general assessment for how good a game is take your tier, multiply it by 10,000. That's roughly how much damage you should be looking to do in any given game. So he's done double that. And it was fun to watch, and just fun to watch the St. Louis again. You don't see a lot of low tier replays. Most of the ones I tend to get come in at tier 7. And I think a lot of the reason for that is that's where the bulk of players are. You spend a lot of the time of this game in the mid tiers. Once in a while there's some high tier games, but there's not a lot of low tier ones getting sent in because a lot of people just don't go back down to play. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this one. I hope you've enjoyed the little slideshow at the end. And if you did, please consider giving it a thumbs up or subscribing. And as always, I'll have another one for you later.